just in case people are feeling a little bit disappointed in what we've just been hearing, late-breaking news about the patient involvement, I think the other way to look at this is it is so important that we get this right, that we get really strong and input at this early stage. So let's look at it in that positive way. So first question, we've got 15 minutes for question now, is to David. And please, could you just announce your affiliation?
David Harry, European AIDS Treatment Group. I would like to comment on what Florian Schmidt just presented on the patients for the PRAC. I was very keen to go there. And I think I would have done my job there as I did in the trial phase. However, with the current conflict of interest policy, it is impossible for me to go there. I could be isolated within my organization to do my work at the PRAC, but I cannot give up my work I am doing with industry in my own country because we are only a few people. So this has put me in an awkward position, and I had to decide what I can do. And I can obviously not comply with this conflict of interest policy as it is set, and therefore I didn't run. We also, regarding the policy, we see that our people in other decision-making committees, like the pediatric committees, cannot take on rapporteurship anymore. This is the reason why we sent them there, and they did a good job and were a pain in the butt of industry. So I really don't understand this, and I think we have to find a way out of the current policy. Otherwise, the patient involvement in the committees is not going to fly, or you are getting people who don't know what they are talking about.
Well, thank you, David. That's a bit of insight. And with all this late-breaking news, we have to absorb what the issues are in front of us. It clearly comes from the European Parliament. I don't know, Florian, if you want to offer any comment or simply to note what we've just heard. This is something from the European Parliament.
I would agree that we are here in a certain dilemma because we search for persons with a specific expertise, especially for Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, but also for other scientific committees. And people with this background may also be involved in activities with pharmaceutical industry. So yes, there is this dilemma. On the other hand, this conflict of interest issue is, as all the members have voting rights and can influence the decision, an important element which we cannot get rid of. We have, of course, told the Parliament or informed the Parliament about constraints the organizations have when nominating those persons, and that we believe that these constraints, as you just mentioned, are a major reason for the low number now for PRAC, but also for other scientific committees. So it's not a standalone case. I was involved in the latest pediatric committee call for the expression of interest, and there we also had not a lot of more candidates as we have now for PRAC. But nevertheless, we have to take into account what the Parliament has reported to us, and as they have issued this specific request, as disappointing it is, we have now to live with it.
But there needs to be further general consideration, I think, as you say, it's not just the PRAC. Other questions? This is Suzette Cox, please. Would you like to give your affiliation? We know from the agenda you're from European Generics Association.
Yes,
your question.
From yes, it's a question to Florian, just to know about the vote in the Standing Committee on the Implementing Regulation. What is the outcome? Does it need to be unanimity, or is it a qualified majority, or what is the situation?
Florian, thank you.
It's basically qualified majority.
Other questions? Colleague on the left here, thank you.
Omer de Mol, Genzyme. Is there a potential impact then on the date of inauguration of the PRAC committee from this?
From the vote on the 29th and about 2 weeks to publish, is there an impact on the PRAC?
On the time that the PRAC will be installed?
It's in relation to the patient issue.
Yes.
Not the one that we've just heard.
No.
Thank you. I was going to say, okay, no, it won't impact there. I think it's an important reflection. You've implied that the process effectively begins again, and that will realistically take a number of months. So the question is, what will impact be on the operation of the PRAC? Has the Commission given its thoughts to this? I mean, clearly this is news from the last day, I think, or day or two. Florian, what will the impact be? How will it be addressed?
What we are missing then for the first months is basically the voice of the patients and the healthcare professionals. But in operational terms, PRAC will have the inaugural meeting in July and will operate then on the basis of the members or with the members that have been appointed, and will of course address the tasks attributed to the committee in a normal way.
Although it won't be constituted in the terms that the legislation prescribes. So I think you've raised an interesting point. Colleague on the right at the back, thank you.
Yeah, this is Elmar Kroth for the HGP delegation. Just a question to Florian Schmidt. Maybe it's just an issue for clarification. You mentioned the phase-in period for the implementing regulation. Does this still cover the requirements for the pharmacovigilance system master file, or excluded it?
Thank you, Florian.
For the pharmacovigilance system master file, we will probably not foresee a specific transition period there. I think the question and answer document addresses also some issues, as the pharmacovigilance system master file is required for new products. We believe that companies can use the time they basically also have in parallel to the processing of the application to compile the documents for the pharmacovigilance system master file, so that there is, because we start with it from July and the first authorizations under the new legislation will be only granted a couple of months after July, I think there will be enough time for companies to set up the system.
I guess we may be exploring this further. I don't know, do you want to comment on that one, Dr. Garcia? Thank you.
Maybe, just to say that still legislation, while we try to have patients and healthcare professionals in the committee, still the current legislation allows the PRAC, whenever it's necessary, to consult patients on a case-by-case when there is a need to have their input on a specific issue. And until we have the patients as members, we can still operate this system, and hopefully we can have the input of them.
Well, thank you for that. And I know we're going backwards and forwards a little. This refers to the very first question on the involvement of the patient representatives. And Dr. Garcia runs the Patient and Consumer Working Party. And that's a very helpful contribution to say that there are still means to involve that valuable perspective. So please, I think a note of reassurance. Other questions from colleagues? At the back on the right, please.
Marita Schmigelo from Europa Bio. I know this meeting is not about public hearing, but I have one question for clarification. You referred to, or Peter Arle referred to, that he will follow the referral procedure. Does that mean that only questions, safety questions, which have raised concerns upfront, can be raised at public hearing, or can also other questions be raised? My question is because in US we know that all kinds of questions could be raised, but we also know within the current referral procedures that it's only questions which has been raised for concerns which can be at that public or at the referral procedure.
Well, thank you. That's an interesting question. Peter, please.
Well, it's a very interesting question. There has been huge debate amongst the regulatory parties, certainly, and we've raised it at previous stakeholder meetings on how best to use the opportunities for public hearings. And I've always been one of the protagonists for moving forward with this. I know a lot of people are nervous about public hearings, but actually I think it will be a really important step forward in terms of hearing the public, which is what the words would suggest it should be for. I put it to you that actually public hearings we could have done last year and the year before and the year before that. There's nothing in the legislation to have stopped us. What the legislation does is it compels us to do it. And the specific legal reference is in the context of pharmacovigilance referrals. Although I would put it to you that the referrals can also be benefit risk referrals, not just pure safety referrals, because the scope of pharmacovigilance and the scope of the mandate of the PRAC is risk in the context of therapeutic benefit, if you like. So it is inevitable that we will start gaining experience with public hearings in the context of referrals. But my crystal ball, which is not always right, but is sometimes right, would suggest that in a few years' time, public hearings, if once we've learned how to do it and hopefully do it well, we might expand that to other areas. And I've got a feeling that society might demand that also. That would be my prediction.
From industry point of view, then I just have one comment, because it's a huge, huge task, the way they are operated in US, where they never know upfront which questions actually could be raised. I know these kind of hearings are different from what is going on in EU, but still I would just raise concerns already now really to restrict the numbers of additional questions to be raised, because it's almost impossible actually for the companies to prepare in this way.
Well, thank you for those comments, and I'm sure the value that Peter envisages will only really be gained if the planning and the scope is well defined to all concerned. Colleague on the left here, please.
Isabel Clamu, FPA. A question to Florian Schmidt. We know that there is ongoing debate within the Council and the Parliament on the revised directive and revised regulation. We saw the report from the Environment Committee of the Parliament proposing some amendments to the current Commission's proposal, which would impact the urgent union procedure and other aspects of the current pharmacovigilance legislation where we are currently envisaging implementing measures. So from what we heard from the Parliament and the Council, it's unlikely that there will be a common position reached by July the 1st. So would the Commission have certain... it would be helpful to hear with the Commission how they will see that impacting the running of the PRAC and the urgent union procedure, particularly the scope.
Well, thank you. Another very good question. And do you have a crystal ball, Florian? Would you like to comment on the various concerns that have been raised there?
No, unfortunately, I have no crystal ball, but of course, the Commission is also hoping that we have a first reading agreement and that we can swiftly adopt these slight modifications, I would say, or slight improvements, because the background for this legislative procedure is basically the Mediator case in France and certain gaps we identified in the new legislation and which we wanted to address. It will not impact the start of the new legislation in July, but once it is adopted, it will basically fine-tune the procedures and perhaps also slightly impact the scope of the referral procedures. We actually have today a Council working group in Brussels where the Council is trying to finalize its comments on the Commission proposal. And once this is done, then the negotiations with the Parliament can really start. And then we also see whether we are really heading for a first reading agreement or whether there are still some stumbling blocks which need to be addressed in a second reading.
So a clear message, it won't impede the beginning, but it may result in, as you've said, fine-tuning as we go forward. And scope is also there in your words, and scope is sometimes not quite such fine-tuning, but let's keep a close eye and hope the Danish presidency have a strong will to finish as we speak. Other questions? Colleague at the front on the right, please.
Richard Price, European Association of Hospital Pharmacists. June, in your penultimate slide, you mentioned about performance measurement of the new pharmacovigilance system. Can you say any more about what those measures may be and how they'll be developed?
That's an enormously challenging question, and it would take me a long time, I think, to start putting thoughts together. But I just wanted to have it there in our minds so that as we focus on all the details, we don't lose sight of the fact that there are very legitimate questions about how resource and investment bring actual measurable benefit. I'm glad that you, as a professional who's key to the success of this endeavour, have spoken, and myself would like to see measures that relate to the integration. Obviously, Article 102 requires the member states to take all steps to encourage reporting and so forth. But there is much more to it than simply reporting. I could say to you, I could measure metrics of how many pharmacy professionals report and so forth, how well they're monitoring the introduction of new medicines and their safety. But I think we want things that look perhaps a little bit beyond that, to how well is pharmacovigilance integrated throughout the life cycle of a medicine for all those that use it, and what would be the appropriate measures. Peter, would you like to speak?
It's a fascinating question, and if you want to look at the bottom line, if you like, and many of you have seen slides from me where I quote the Commission's impact assessment about potential lives saved and so on from new legislation, actually to measure that in a scientifically robust way is almost impossible. However, I think we are obliged to look at the impact of the legislation, and it'll probably often be surrogates of real health outcomes that we're looking at. And I wonder whether we might make a little focus of this in our stakeholder meeting in the autumn, because by then, I know that a number of the colleagues are considering this very actively. We might have a sort of concept paper, if you like, some ideas together on what sort of information we might collect. And it would be, I think, really interesting to discuss it with patient groups, healthcare professional groups, industry, and so on, and therefore maybe make it a focus for our meeting, or part of the meeting in the autumn.
And if I can't resist just adding another thought to that, which is there could be very much more to be gained from how we minimise the risk from medication error. And I think pharmacy profession will have a very critical role in helping to move forward there. So more work, more thought as we go forward. Other questions from colleagues? I think we might have time for just one more. If not, I think we've got a great deal to think about. The slide presentations will be made available, I hope, by tomorrow. So all those really invaluable dates that Peter presented and the perspective from Florian you'll be able to absorb. I know that for colleagues in this room who are actively engaged in planning, they are vital. So they will be available.